Derby County defender Curtis Nelson could be heading out during the January transfer window with a huge set of decisions to be made by John Eustace over the course of the coming days. Now, Curtis Nelson has been a massive part of Derby County since their drop down to League One. He signed under Paul Warne, was a massive part of the squad which got us back to the Championship and was a huge part of the team that kept us up in the division last year despite his injury around January time. Now, over the course of the last few days, he had made his return to first team action with some minutes off the bench up against Leicester City. But is that going to be enough to keep him in the building when it comes to the end of January? That is something which we're going to cover in this video. Now, obviously, if you have not done so already, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on the notification bell. This is the Derby Digest. Now, this report comes from Football League World, suggesting that Derby County are ready to offload their £5,000 a week star. Now, for me, this is probably the least surprising news that is coming out over the course of the preparation for the transfer window for me. I spoke about it in the summer. I felt like if Curtis Nelson had been fit enough to go in the summer, I do believe he would have done. And ultimately, I believe that Curtis Nelson is one of those players who is going to be moved on across the course of the next few weeks. Now, obviously, over the course of the last 3 or 4 weeks or so, obviously Owen Beck returned to Liverpool, which meant that Curtis Nelson was able to be registered, which has led to him making his first appearance of the season. But does that mean he's going to be a part of the squad for the long term? Now, to be quite honest with you, I think the answer to that question is no. As much as Curtis Nelson has obviously been given that registration slot for now and obviously played as he did against Leicester a couple of days ago, I just don't necessarily believe that he will stay. I just don't think it makes a great deal of sense, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. I just think that Curtis Nelson is very much in that position of he's still good enough to start, maybe in League One, maybe lower end Championship, and that is my personal opinion. But I just don't necessarily think that Derby County should be continuing to play him, if that makes sense. I just don't think that's the direction we're going in, especially when you look at the options we have in that centre-back position. Not only do you have Curtis Nelson in there, but you've got Craig Forsyth, you've got Sondre Langas, you've got Matt Clark, you've got Dion Sanderson, Ryan Niambi can slot in at centre-half. You've got so many options. Danny Bart is another one. And as much as I like Curtis Nelson, I like what he's done for the club over recent years, I just think that we're moments away from Derby County really having a solid Championship squad. And I think that comes with players like Curtis Nelson moving on, players like Caden Jackson, players like Corey Blackett-Taylor, you even look in midfield, a player like Ebo Adams, Liam Thompson moving on. That is how Derby County are going to become a proper, stable Championship club. And I think, obviously, Curtis Nelson's deal expires this summer, although I do believe there is an extension clause in there, which I believe the club has to trigger, which, if we go back 12 months ago in December, triggering that extension clause was a no-brainer. However, 12 months later, with the introduction of Sondre Langas, the introduction of Dion Sanderson and Matt Clark, I think it's less of a no-brainer, especially after 11 months out with an ACL injury. Now, do I think that Curtis Nelson can have an impact at Derby County if we did decide to keep him? Absolutely. He's definitely a player who has the ability to play in this division, and I'm not going to turn around and say that he doesn't. I'm not going to give Curtis Nelson dog's abuse, let's say. He is a good footballer. Now, what I think Derby County have to look at in this regard is there a possibility to go out and get better players, whether it be in the centre-back position or in other positions along the pitch, than Curtis Nelson is? And I think the answer to that question is yes. And that is where I think this decision is really a no-brainer about what Derby County do. And I personally believe that this decision by Derby County has probably already been made. I've had my own opinion on this over the course of the last few weeks. And with Owen Beck going back to Liverpool, I think it gave Derby County a perfect opportunity to put Curtis Nelson in the shop window, which started off with putting him on the bench. It's then giving him minutes off the bench to show clubs that he's ready, he's available and he's fit. And that is the situation we find ourselves in my personal opinion. I put a tweet out on Twitter on Saturday while I was at the game. I said before Curtis Nelson came on that John Eustace was going to bring Curtis Nelson on to give a bit of a positive spin to the game. Although there's nothing positive you can take away from losing 3-1, I think the club will see that as a positive, because even if they don't let Curtis Nelson go, it's an extra body around the squad that we didn't have a few weeks ago. So it is going to be interesting to see how it develops. And I do think that there's a lot of development to be done in terms of Derby County's squad. And I think that obviously, Ebel Adams had an absolute stinker at the weekend, and we've spoke about Ebel Adams time and time again. Obviously, Curtis Nelson, another one who's probably going to move on. Liam Thompson. This is what Derby County need as they try and build this stable Championship squad. Now, if you'd have told me 3-4 months ago that Derby County would maybe be looking to move on Curtis Nelson, I wouldn't have been shocked. If you'd have told me Corey Blackett-Taylor, Caden Jackson potentially all moving on in January, again, I wouldn't be shocked. Now, obviously, when it comes to Blackett-Taylor, when it comes to Caden Jackson, as it stands right now, there is no reports or anything like that. But I think when you look at what Derby County are trying to do and the direction they're going to move in, I think they're next out the door, to be completely honest. You look at someone like Bertrand Diaz, who's not going to be a cheap loan. There's going to have been a loan fee involved. We're going to be paying a part of his wages. And I believe he'll probably be heading back in January, because I just don't think he's hit the levels that was anticipated of him, if I'm completely honest. Now, it'll be very interesting to see what does happen, and I think this Curtis Nelson situation opens the door for a lot of people to start having discussions about who could move on and who could stay. And I also think that Derby County have got to have a real look in their academy, bringing up some central midfield options and bringing up some attacking options as well, because we're lacking in numbers in those areas, and we're going round and round with the same cohort of players expecting different results. And I think I said it when Paul Warne was in charge last year, that what's the saying? There's a saying, doing things over and over again and expecting different results. And I feel like we're in that same boat again with John Eustace. Obviously, we lost to Middlesbrough. Puts out the same team a week later, we get battered by Leicester City. It's a real difficult position that we find ourselves in my opinion, because we do have a squad that's capable in this division. I said that last year with an even worse squad, and I thought last year's squad could have finished in mid-table. And I think this squad definitely has the ability to be just outside the playoffs, considering the improvements from last year. But the problem that we have is that we just can't seem to get a tune out of everybody, and there's certain games where I just feel as if we're definitely lacking a few numbers. Now, obviously, you can let me know your thoughts and feelings on Curtis Nelson and his potential January move down in the comments if you have not done so already. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. This has been the Derby Digest. I'll catch you later.